The Blackwood estate sprawled across 40 acres of manicured perfection, its marble fountains catching the morning sun like scattered diamonds. Inside the main mansion, Marcus Blackwood, 28 years old, an heir to a $3 billion fortune, scrolled through his social media empire from a golden-framed bed that cost more than most people's homes. 5 million followers hung on his every post, desperate for glimpses into a life of impossible luxury. But Marcus didn't just want their admiration. He craved their envy, fed on their desperation, and most of all, he loved to remind them of the insurmountable distance between his world and theirs. His grandfather, Theodore Blackwood, had built this empire from nothing, transforming a small investment firm into a global financial powerhouse. But Theodore was dying now, confined to the estate's west wing, his body failing while his mind remained sharp as the blade that had cut through decades of business dealings. Marcus visited him once a week, for exactly 15 minutes, just long enough to ensure his inheritance remained secure. On this particular Tuesday morning, a young woman named Sarah Chen arrived at the estate's service entrance. 25 years old, wearing a simple gray cardigan over faded jeans, she carried a volunteer badge from the local hospice organization. Her assignment was simple: provide companionship to Theodore Blackwood during his final months. She had specifically requested this position, though she kept her reasons to herself. Sarah's worn canvas shoes made no sound on the marble floors as the house manager led her through corridors lined with priceless art. Her eyes, dark and observant, took in every detail: the Monet in the hallway, the Fabergé eggs in their climate-controlled cases, the family portraits spanning 3 generations. She paused for just a moment at one particular portrait, a painting of a young woman from the 1960s, before continuing on. Marcus first noticed her as she crossed the main foyer. His eyes swept over her cheap clothes, her simple ponytail, the way she clutched her volunteer folder like a shield. His lips curved into the kind of smile that preceded his cruelest impulses.
Over the following weeks, Sarah became a fixture in Theodore's room. She read to him from old investment journals, played chess with surprising skill, and listened to his stories about building his empire. Theodore's eyes, clouded with age, seemed to clear whenever she entered the room. The nurses noticed he smiled more, ate better, even attempted to sit up straighter when Sarah was present. Marcus observed these visits through the security system. His interest piqued not by his grandfather's improvement, but by the potential for content. His followers loved his charity posts, the ones where he gave $100 bills to homeless people while filming their grateful tears, or surprised minimum wage workers with $1,000 tips, ensuring their emotional breakdowns were captured in 4K resolution. But those were getting stale. He needed something fresh, something that would truly showcase the vast gulf between his world and everyone else's. The idea struck him during one of Sarah's chess games with Theodore. He watched her concentrate on the board, her forehead creased with focus, completely unaware of the cameras recording her every move. She wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, brought the same dented water bottle, ate the same packed lunch of a simple sandwich and apple. She was perfect, the absolute embodiment of everything his followers were: ordinary, struggling, and desperate for any crumb of the life he lived. Marcus crafted his plan with the meticulous attention he usually reserved for hostile business takeovers. He would create a video series called Charity Case Challenge, where he would transform a deserving volunteer's life for exactly 1 week, then document what happened when the fairy tale ended. The cruelty was in the details. He would give Sarah a taste of ultimate luxury, let her believe her life was changing, then rip it all away while filming her devastation. His followers would eat it up, reassured that the boundary between their world and his remained unbreakable. He began with small gestures, appearing suddenly during Sarah's visits with his grandfather. He complimented her dedication, left expensive chocolates on the side table for her, had the kitchen staff bring her gourmet lunches she hadn't asked for. Sarah accepted these gestures with quiet grace, neither gushing with gratitude nor refusing the kindness. This annoyed Marcus. He was used to more dramatic reactions, but it also made him more determined to break through her composure. The turning point came when Marcus accidentally overheard Sarah on the phone in the garden discussing her overdue rent with her landlord. She was 2 months behind, facing eviction, though she never mentioned this during her time at the estate. Marcus's eyes lit up with the predatory gleam of a hunter who'd finally spotted the perfect prey. He had his hook. The next morning, Marcus made his grand entrance into Theodore's room, while Sarah was reading aloud from a vintage biography of Warren Buffett. He was dressed in a $10,000 suit, flanked by his personal videographer and assistant. Sarah looked up, confused as Marcus announced his magnificent gesture. He would be featuring her in his new charity series, giving her the week of a lifetime, all expenses paid, culminating in a grand shopping spree where she could keep everything she chose. Sarah's initial refusal only sweetened the moment for Marcus. He turned to his grandfather, speaking about how important it was to reward those who gave selflessly to others. Theodore, watching from his bed, said nothing, but his eyes moved between Marcus and Sarah with an expression that might have worried his grandson, had Marcus been paying attention to anyone but his future victim. When Sarah finally agreed, softly mentioning that the money could help her avoid eviction, Marcus had to suppress his triumphant smile. The videographer captured her reluctant acceptance, her obvious discomfort with the camera, the way she kept looking to Theodore as if seeking permission or guidance. The old man simply nodded once, slowly, his fingers tapping against his blanket in a pattern Sarah seemed to recognize.
The week that followed was documented in excruciating detail. Marcus dressed Sarah in designer clothes that she wore uncomfortably, like a child playing dress-up. He took her to restaurants where a single meal cost more than her monthly rent, filming her confusion at the multiple forks, her attempts to pronounce French menu items, her visible discomfort when other patrons stared. He brought her to his country club, introducing her to his friends as his charity case, watching them snicker behind manicured hands as Sarah tried to navigate conversations about yacht clubs and Swiss boarding schools. But the cruelest moment was saved for the final day. Marcus had promised a shopping spree where Sarah could keep everything, but he had set a trap. The stores were briefed in advance. Everything Sarah chose would be packaged and wrapped, but the payment would be declined at the final moment. Marcus would film her humiliation as she realized it was all a joke, that she would leave with nothing, that the entire week had been an elaborate prank for his 5 million followers' entertainment. Sarah stood at the counter of the luxury boutique, surrounded by bags containing clothes that could have paid her rent for 2 years. The saleswoman ran the card with a practiced smile that faltered as she announced, loudly enough for everyone to hear, that the payment had been declined. Marcus stepped forward, his camera crew capturing every angle of Sarah's face as he explained that the charity case challenge was about showing how temporary privilege was for people like her, how they should appreciate what they had instead of reaching for what they could never maintain. But Sarah didn't cry. She didn't beg or rage or provide the breakdown Marcus had choreographed. Instead, she carefully set down each bag, looked directly into the camera with an expression of such profound pity that Marcus actually stepped back. And then she spoke, not to him, but to the lens, to his 5 million followers. Her words were calm, measured, and they would change everything. As Sarah walked out of the boutique with quiet dignity, leaving Marcus surrounded by the empty bags of his failed cruelty, his phone began to buzz, then his assistant's phone, then the videographer's phone. Within minutes, every device in their possession was lighting up with notifications. Marcus grabbed his phone, his face draining of color as he read the message from the estate's law firm. Theodore Blackwood had passed away 20 minutes ago, precisely as Sarah was being humiliated in the boutique. But that wasn't what made Marcus's hands shake. It was the second message, marked urgent, requiring his immediate presence for the reading of Theodore's will, a will that had been changed just 1 week ago, witnessed by 3 lawyers and a judge. And according to the message, Sarah Chen was named as a primary beneficiary. The volunteer he had just humiliated before the world wasn't just a random hospice worker. The truth was far more devastating, and it was about to destroy everything Marcus thought he knew about his inheritance, his family, and the quiet woman who had just walked out of his life. Or so he thought. The Blackwood Estate's Grand Library had hosted countless family meetings over the decades, but none quite like this. Marcus arrived 40 minutes late, having stopped to delete the boutique videos from his cloud storage, a futile gesture, as his assistant had already uploaded them automatically. He entered to find Sarah already seated at the mahogany table, now wearing the same simple gray cardigan from her first day. Beside her sat 3 partners from Cromwell & Associates, the city's most prestigious law firm, and Judge Harrison Clark, who had been Theodore's closest friend for 60 years. The lead attorney, Margaret Cromwell herself, opened a sealed envelope with ceremonial precision. Her voice carried the weight of legal authority as she began reading Theodore Blackwood's final will and testament, dated exactly 1 week prior. The first several bequests were expected: charitable donations, trust funds for long-serving staff, provisions for extended family. Marcus shifted impatiently, waiting for the inevitable moment when his $3 billion inheritance would be confirmed. But then, Cromwell's voice shifted, taking on an almost reverent tone. "To my biological granddaughter, Sarah Chen Blackwood, whom I have watched with pride as she chose compassion over revelation, dignity over vindication, and service over entitlement, I leave 70% of my estate, including controlling interest in Blackwood Financial Holdings." The truth, when Cromwell revealed it, was more devastating than any punishment Marcus could have imagined. Sarah Chen was the daughter of Theodore's eldest son, William, the son who had died in a car accident 30 years ago, along with his wife. William had married Chen Mei Lin against Theodore's wishes, causing a family rift that Theodore had regretted every day since. After William's death, Mei Lin's family had raised Sarah in modest circumstances, never telling Theodore of her existence, never asking for a penny of Blackwood money. Sarah had discovered her heritage only 2 years ago while settling her adoptive mother's estate. Among the papers, she found her birth certificate, adoption documents, and a faded photograph of William Blackwood with her biological mother. She could have approached Theodore immediately, could have claimed her birthright, could have lived in luxury. Instead, she chose to meet her grandfather as a hospice volunteer, to know him without the filter of money and expectation, to give him comfort in his final days without asking for anything in return. Theodore had recognized her the moment she walked in. She had her grandmother's eyes, the same eyes from the portrait Sarah had paused at in the hallway. But he said nothing, waiting to see what she would do. Week after week, he watched her choose kindness over profit, watched her care for him while his acknowledged grandson, Marcus, ignored him except to secure inheritance. The chess games weren't just games. They were tests of strategy and character, all of which Sarah passed without knowing she was being evaluated. While Marcus sat in stunned silence, Sarah finally turned to face him. She pulled out her phone, not the latest model like his, but functional enough, and showed him the screen. The boutique video had indeed gone viral, but not in the way Marcus had intended. His 5 million followers were abandoning him in real time, the follower count dropping like a stock market crash. The comments section had become a wasteland of disgust and rage. But more importantly, The video had been picked up by major news outlets, each one digging deeper into Marcus Blackwood's history of exploiting people for content. Former victims began speaking out. The homeless veteran Marcus had filmed for a charity revealed that Marcus had paid him to act more desperate than he was. The minimum wage worker who'd received the $1,000 tip exposed how Marcus had demanded it back after filming. Dozens of stories poured forth, creating an avalanche of revelations that transformed Marcus from influencer to pariah in less than 3 hours. But Sarah hadn't orchestrated this. She had simply been herself, dignified in the face of cruelty, composed when anyone else would have broken. Her single look of pity into Marcus's camera conveyed more truth than his 5 million followers had ever seen from him. They recognized authenticity when they saw it, and they recognized its absence in everything Marcus had ever posted.
Cromwell continued reading the will's provisions with surgical precision. Marcus would receive exactly what he had given others, false hope followed by revelation. He would inherit a trust fund that would pay him the exact amount of a minimum wage salary, 40 hours a week, for the rest of his life. He could not access the principal, could not borrow against it, could not increase it through any means. He would experience life as the people he had mocked lived it, budget to budget, paycheck to paycheck. Furthermore, Theodore had attached a condition. The estate Marcus had lived in his entire life would be converted into a hospice facility, run by the organization Sarah volunteered for. Marcus had 30 days to vacate. His cars, registered to the company, would be liquidated. His designer clothes, technically purchased with company credit cards, would be donated to charity. Every material possession Marcus thought he owned was actually property of Blackwood Financial Holdings, and Sarah now controlled the company. The most devastating blow came in a personal letter Theodore had instructed to be read aloud. In it, he expressed his deepest regret, not for disinheriting Marcus, but for enabling him for so long. He had watched his grandson become exactly what he had fought against his whole life, someone who believed wealth was character, that privilege was earned simply by being born, that other people existed solely for his entertainment. Theodore had built his empire from nothing, working 18-hour days, treating every employee with respect, understanding that wealth was responsibility, not superiority. In the days that followed, Sarah Chen Blackwood made decisions that would have shocked Marcus had he been capable of understanding them. She didn't move into the main estate. Instead, she converted it immediately into the hospice facility, keeping one small wing as a modest apartment for herself. She didn't buy designer clothes or luxury cars. She continued driving her 8-year-old Honda, continued wearing her comfortable cardigans, continued bringing her dented water bottle to board meetings. But she did make changes. Blackwood Financial Holdings pivoted toward ethical investing, divesting from predatory lending practices Marcus had pushed for. She established a foundation for hospice workers, providing better wages and training. She created a program for young people aging out of foster care, giving them not handouts, but opportunities, not charity, but dignity.
6 months later, a documentary filmmaker researching Theodore Blackwood's life uncovered one final secret that put everything in perspective. Hidden in Theodore's personal effects was a journal entry from the day after William's death 30 years ago. In it, Theodore had written about his son's final words to him, spoken during their last argument. "Dad, I'd rather die poor and loved than live rich and alone. Wealth isn't what you leave behind in bank accounts, it's what you leave behind in hearts." Theodore had spent 30 years learning that lesson, watching Marcus repeat his mistakes, until Sarah arrived. She had embodied William's philosophy without ever knowing her father, proving that character wasn't inherited through blood or money, but through choice. Every day she had spent with Theodore, she had unknowingly been teaching him what his own son had tried to show him, that true wealth was measured in kindness, not net worth. The documentary included one last piece of footage, security camera video from Theodore's room on his final day. As Sarah read to him from the Buffett biography, Theodore had whispered something the microphones barely caught. Sarah had leaned in, listened, then nodded with tears in her eyes. Later, enhancement of the audio revealed his words, "Tell your father, I finally understood." Sarah now runs Blackwood Financial Holdings with the same quiet dignity she brought to Theodore's bedside. The company's value has tripled under her leadership, but more importantly, it has become a force for ethical business practices worldwide. Marcus works as an assistant manager at a local electronics store, having deleted all his social media accounts. Former employees say he's different now, quieter, more respectful, seemingly understanding for the first time what it means to earn rather than inherit respect. In the renovated Blackwood Hospice Center, 2 portraits now hang in the main hallway. The first is the original, Theodore's mother, the immigrant woman who worked 3 jobs to put her son through school, whose eyes Sarah had inherited across generations. The second, newly commissioned, shows Sarah in her gray cardigan, sitting at a chessboard, her hand extended as if inviting the viewer to play. But there's a third frame on that wall, smaller than the others, almost unnoticeable unless you know to look for it. It contains a simple photograph, not a painted portrait, but a candid shot captured by a hospice nurse. It shows Theodore and Sarah, grandfather and granddaughter, in the middle of a chess game. Both are smiling, not for any camera, not for any audience, but simply because they had found each other in time to say goodbye. The real inheritance, it turns out, was never about money. It was about the 43 days Sarah spent with Theodore, proving that love doesn't announce itself with wealth, and that sometimes the greatest fortune is discovering family in the quiet moments before it's too late. And in the end, Theodore Blackwood, who had built an empire on understanding value, had finally learned the difference between net worth and true worth, taught by a volunteer in a gray cardigan who wanted nothing more than to know her grandfather before he was gone.